We don't serve people like you here." She said that to the man who owned every plate she was eating from. An old man in a wrinkled coat walked into the most exclusive restaurant in the city. He didn't have a reservation. He didn't have anyone with him. He quietly asked the hostess for a table for one. Before she could answer, a woman in a red dress standing behind him in line cut in front and said, "Excuse me, I have a reservation. Can you seat me first? I don't think this man can even afford the bread here." She looked him up and down and laughed. The hostess hesitated. The old man, his name was Edward, said nothing. He stepped aside. The woman in red walked past him without a second glance, sat at the best table by the window and ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu. Edward was eventually seated at a small table near the kitchen, the worst table in the house. The waiter barely looked at him. When Edward asked for a glass of water, the waiter said, "We'll get to you when we can, sir." 15 minutes passed. No water, no menu. Then the woman in red made it worse. She called the waiter over and said loudly, "Can you ask that man near the kitchen to stop looking over here? It's making me uncomfortable. Honestly, they should have a dress code to keep people like that out." 2 tables nearby laughed. Edward heard every word. He folded his hands in his lap and looked down at the tablecloth. But he didn't leave. "Now, let me tell you about the man sitting at the worst table in the house." Edward Malone spent 40 years in the restaurant industry. He started as a dishwasher at 16. He saved every penny. By 30, he opened his first restaurant, a tiny diner with 12 seats. Over the next 3 decades, he built the Malone Restaurant Group, the largest fine dining empire in the country. 44 restaurants, 600 employees, and this restaurant, Le Marais, was his newest acquisition. He had purchased it just 72 hours ago. No one on the staff knew what the new owner looked like. The purchase was made through a holding company. Edward didn't want a tour or a welcome party. He wanted to sit down like a regular customer and see how his restaurant treated people when no one important was watching. After 20 minutes of being ignored, Edward calmly stood up, walked to the hostess stand and said, "Could you please call your general manager? Tell him the new owner of Le Marais is here and would like to speak with him." The hostess stared at him. Then she forced a laugh. "Sir, please, the new owner is not—" She stopped mid-sentence because the general manager had just come running out of the back office, pale as a ghost. He had just received a photo of the new owner from the corporate office. He was staring at it on his phone. Then he looked up at Edward. Same face. The general manager's voice cracked. "Mr. Malone, sir, I am so sorry. We didn't know." Edward raised his hand. "That's exactly the problem. You didn't know. And because you didn't know, you showed me exactly who you are." Edward asked the general manager to gather the entire staff in the dining room. Then he turned to the woman in the red dress, who was now sitting frozen with her wine glass halfway to her lips, and said, "Ma'am, you're welcome to stay for this. I think you need to hear it too." Edward addressed the room. "I started as a dishwasher. I have scrubbed floors, unclogged drains, and served thousands of meals to people who never once said thank you. And I loved every second of it because I was taught that every person who walks through your door deserves the same respect, whether they're wearing a suit or a wrinkled coat." Then he looked at the waiter who had ignored him. "You made a 70-year-old man wait 15 minutes for a glass of water in my restaurant." The waiter opened his mouth. Edward shook his head. "Don't. Your last check will be mailed to you." He turned to the hostess. "You seated me by the kitchen because of how I look. You'll be reassigned. If you want to stay in this company, you'll start where I started, in the dish pit. Maybe the view from there will teach you what the view from the front door didn't." Finally, Edward turned to the woman in the red dress. The entire restaurant was watching. She hadn't moved. Her wine glass was still frozen in the air. Edward walked to her table, pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He said, "I'm not going to embarrass you. Life will do that on its own. But I want you to know something. The man you said couldn't afford the bread here, he owns the wheat field it came from, the flour mill that ground it, the bakery that baked it, and the restaurant you're sitting in. I could buy everything in your life and still have change left over. But that's not what matters." He leaned in. "What matters is that you laughed at an old man who just wanted a quiet dinner. And every person in this room saw it. That's a debt money can't pay." The woman set her glass down. Her hands were shaking. She stood up, walked to the door, and left without her coat. Edward sat there alone for a moment. Then Diane, the only waitress who had smiled at him when he walked in, approached his table and set down a glass of water. Edward looked up and said, "Thank you, sweetheart. That's all I ever wanted." He took a sip, smiled, and whispered to himself what his father told him 50 years ago.